Welcome to On the Level, a home for Masonic education.
A journey through the first degree. I call this talk a journey through the first degree because I intend to conduct the listener through the first degree in the order of the ceremony, touching on its highlights and adding interpretations and explanation where necessary. In our journey through the first degree we meet a series of challenges. No doubt we all remember that first challenge, do you feel anything? That first incident was designed to intimate to us that we were about to engage in something serious and solemn. We were no sooner inside the lodge than we were faced with a second challenge, are you free? Then, when we avowed that we were unfettered, body, mind, and soul, the blessing of the Almighty was invoked on the proceedings. Then, without a pause, came the third and most important challenge of all, in all cases of difficulty and danger, in whom do you put your trust? There is, of course, only one answer, but that answer is a confession of a simple faith, the simple faith of Masonry. We do not inquire a candidate's religion, but we do insist on a belief in a supreme being. Faith in the great architect of the universe is the rock foundation on which the whole of our Masonic edifice is built. Our candidate knocks 3 times at the junior warden's pedestal, and 3 times at that of the senior warden. These 3 knocks have a profound significance. They betoken the 3 degrees, which in turn represent man's approach to God in each of the 3 phases of his nature, a physical approach, a mental or intellectual approach, and a spiritual approach. The candidate, of course, knows nothing of this at this stage, but the pattern of our 3 degrees is based on this fundamental principle. We advance to the east by 3 irregular steps, symbolizing stepping into the unknown. The first is a timid step, full of caution, the second a little bolder, indicating rising confidence, and the third quite bold, because fear has now been dispelled. The first part of the sign of an entered apprentice has the same significance. Reaching into the unknown. The predominating number of this degree is 3. Just as 5 and 7 are the numbers of the other 2 degrees. And so, as the candidate kneels, he forms 3 squares. The first with his leg, the second with his foot, and the third with his arm. His hand in this position is an emblem of concealment. He takes a vow of concealment, and it is worthy of notice that the words used, heal and conceal, have the same meaning. Heal being derived from the Anglo-Saxon, the language in use before William the Conqueror arrived from Normandy, and conceal being derived from the Norman French that he brought with him, thus establishing a second language in England. Freemasonry here used a word from each language to make sure that it was not misunderstood. This might throw a little light on the age of our ritual. Both these words mean to cover over, just as does our other word heal, which was derived from the same Anglo-Saxon word healen. The thatchers of roofs, particularly in Cornwall and Devon, are called healers to this day, and our nurserymen use that word when they cover the roots of a plant with earth, till they are ready to place it in the ground. The obligation is obviously twofold, since we may neither do certain things ourselves, nor permit them to be done by others, but the word indite, which is not properly understood, makes the obligation threefold. Its meaning is to direct or dictate what is to be uttered. If we may not permit a second person to direct or dictate what is to be uttered or written to a third person, the word has a profound significance on our obligation. When God accused Cain of Abel's murder, he answered, "Am I my brother's keeper?" The word indite in our obligation shows us that we are our brother's keeper. The mere passive witnessing a brother thus violating his obligation implies the violation of our own. We each are made a Mason in the body of a lodge, just, perfect and regular. The word just in this or instance has the archaic meaning of correct, as it does in the investiture of the treasurer when we use the words just and regular accounts. What makes the lodge just? What makes it perfect? And what makes it regular? The sacred volume open on the Master's pedestal makes it just and complete. The number 7 makes it perfect, as we learn in the words of the first tracing board, with a confirmation of that in the second tracing board, as you, no doubt, remember. The warrant or charter issued by a recognized Grand Lodge makes it regular. Without the sacred volume to make the lodge just and complete, the presence of 7 regularly made Masons to make it perfect, and the warrant or charter to make it regular, no lodge can conduct the ceremony of initiation. After the candidate has received the light, he takes his first regular step in Freemasonry, which he does in the form of a tall cross. When I was in India several years ago, I noticed that they used the same words as we do regarding the placing of the candidate's feet, but they added the words so as to form the letter T. This is quite right, as the English letter T is the equivalent of the Greek letter Tor, and the 3 emblems in the form of an inverted letter T on the apron of an installed master are Tor crosses. The letter Tor is the 19th letter in the Greek alphabet. In its original form of a cross, it is probably the most ancient of all sacred signs. It is depicted on the oldest monuments in Egypt, Assyria, Persia, and Hindustan. According to Dr. Albert Mackey, Moses marked this sign on the forehead of his brother, Aaron, when he anointed him as the first high priest of Israel. It was this sign that Ezekiel caused to be marked on the foreheads of the righteous, who were thereby saved from death. In India it is the sign of Brahma, the creator, the first of the Hindu trinity, and used by the Brahmins, the highest caste in that religion. It was highly revered by the ancient Druids, and is, of course, the most sacred sign of Christianity. We form a tall cross in each of the 3 degrees, and when we are exalted in the royal arch, which it is claimed, is not another degree, but the completion of the 3rd. We find the 3 crosses united in the triple Tor. As the left-hand side symbolizes evil, we always take a step with the left foot, as symbolical of putting down evil, before we make this sign. The Latin word for left is sinister, which accounts for the ominous significance attributed to this English word. The word of the degree is a Hebrew word, whose meaning gives us the key to God's covenant with Israel, of which the name of the pillar was intended to be a constant reminder, as we see from this paraphrasing of the covenant. In the strength of Jehovah shall the king rejoice, for he will establish the throne of David, and his kingdom to his seed forever. The pillar has really nothing to do with the great-grandfather of David, since as they both bore the same name, thus the name of one serves as a reminder of the name of the other. Have you anything to give? Here, brethren, is our 4th challenge, and, although at the time we were prevented from accepting that challenge, now that we are Freemasons, we are bound to accept, for we have so much to give. Our time, our energy, our devotion. To disregard this challenge is to condemn ourselves to lack of interest, which so easily becomes that fatal attitude of apathy. The ancient Greeks had 3 words: eros, philia, and agape, which are translated to the same English word, love. But to the Greeks they had 3 distinct meanings. Eros was the love between the sexes, philia the love of man for man, brotherly love, and the 3rd, agape, something far greater, the love of God for man, which, of course, knows no bound. The equivalent of agape in the Latin language was caritas, and it is from this word that our word charity is derived, and it has the same meaning. It seems to have been somewhat degraded in the outside world, but in Freemasonry it still has that deeper meaning. We cannot hope to attain to such a love, but we can strive to emulate it to the best of our ability. Faith, as I have already mentioned, is necessarily the first step in any approach to God, and the 3 degrees in Freemasonry represent our approach to God in the 3 phases of our nature. We belong to God, body, mind, and soul. It is hope that enables us to take the next step, but charity, that sublime virtue derived from an emulation of God's love for man, must be the greatest, and so we depict it on our tracing board as the top rung of the ladder. The Northeast Charge is a dramatization of this great virtue. It reminds us of our obligation to relieve the distress of our indigent brother, and this reminder is constantly repeated at the conclusion of every meeting in the Tyler's Toast. During my Masonic career I have heard several interpretations of the Tyler's Toast, but the following has so appealed to me that I have long forgotten the others. According to this interpretation, the Tyler's Toast is meant to remind us of the time when we stood on the northeast corner of the lodge and listened for the first time to these words. It cannot be denied that we have many members of rank and opulence amongst us, neither can it be concealed that among the thousands who range under its banner, there are some who, perhaps from circumstances of unavoidable calamity and misfortune, are reduced to the lowest ebb of poverty and distress. On their behalf it is our usual custom to awaken the sympathy of every newly initiated brother, by making such a claim, etc. The charge concludes with the words, "Should you, at any future time, meet a brother in distress who might solicit your assistance, you will remember those peculiar moments when you were admitted into Freemasonry, and cheerfully embrace the opportunity of practicing towards him that virtue that you now profess to admire." When we honor this toast to our distressed brethren, we think of them as being dispersed to the 4 points of the compass over the surface of land and water, and so we point, but not to the south, for, symbolically speaking, we are standing in the south, but we point to the other 3. Straight ahead to the north, left to the west, and right to the east. We do this 3 times in allusion to the 3 degrees, which in turn allude to the triple nature of man: body, mind, and soul. For man must dedicate himself to God in each of the 3 phases of his nature, and in each of the 3 degrees to represent our approach to God in that particular phase of our being. When we find ourselves face to face with a distressed brother, what might we be called upon to do in order to carry out this obligation? Well, first of all, we may have to thrust our hands into our pockets where we keep our money. However, financial aid may not be his greatest need, perhaps he is depressed, downcast, discouraged, and our sympathy, counsel, or encouragement could give him renewed strength to fight life's battle. He may have all the money he needs, and yet be destitute of faith, of hope, and of course, and it is our duty to share our faith, our hope, and our courage with him. Our aid to this distressed brother could take yet a 3rd form. Perhaps he is aged, invalid, blind, or otherwise handicapped, and so unable to do something that we could do for him. Some physical task that we could do for him with these hands. Yes, our aid will come from our pockets, from our hearts, or from our hands, and so we indicate each in turn. And we do it 3 times for the same reason that we pointed 3 times. Body, mind, and soul. Hand, head, and heart. North, west, and east. And in silence, because whatever aid we render to our distressed brother will forever remain a secret between the giver and the receiver. To our next merry meeting we say with the hands in this position. The hand in this position always symbolizes concealment, as it was thus that we took our obligation. This time it is a double concealment, representing concealment in two places. It is not only what occurred in the lodge room, but also what occurred here at the festive board, where we honor this toast, that is not to be divulged to the outside world. We call our place of refreshment, the South. Because the cathedral builders always erected their lodge on the sunny side of the construction, which in the northern hemisphere is the South. It was here that our ancient brethren took their refreshment, and so the place of refreshment came to be called the South. It has been well said, "Faith is lost in sight, hope ends in fruition, but charity extends beyond the grave through the boundless realms of eternity." This sounds like a riddle, but it is profound truth, because faith is the assurance of things not seen, and when we finally see, then we believe through sight, and no longer through faith. Faith is lost in sight. As hope exists only in the expectation of possession, it must necessarily cease, when the thing desired is at last enjoyed. Hope ends in fruition, but charity, exercised here on earth in acts of mutual kindness and forbearance, is still to be found in the world to come in its most sublime form, as God's mercy to his erring creatures. In the reasons for preparation we are told that our right arm was made bare in token of our sincerity, and to show that we are able and willing to work. This, brethren, is yet another challenge, similar to give, because unless we are prepared to work diligently in gaining knowledge and carrying out the teachings of the craft, we are sentencing ourselves to the same fate as those who do not give. The important point is that both give and work imply involvement. Again, in the reasons we are told, there was not heard the sound of hammer or any other implement of iron. To my knowledge there are 4 references to this in the sacred volume. The first is a warning, which is given in Exodus 20:25, where we read, "And if thou wilt make me an altar of stone, thou shalt not build it of hewn stone, for if thou lift up thy tool upon it, thou hast polluted it." The second is an instruction, which is given in Deuteronomy 27 verse 5, where we read, "And there shalt thou build an altar unto the Lord thy God, an altar of stones, thou shalt not lift up any iron tool upon them." We know that the command was carried out, because it is recorded in Joshua 8 verse 30 to 31. Then Joshua built an altar unto the Lord God of Israel in Mount Ebal, as Moses the servant of the Lord commanded the children of Israel, as it is written in the book of the law of Moses, an altar of whole stones, over which no man hath lift up any iron. The fourth reference shows us that this law was observed in the erection of King Solomon's temple, for in the first book of Kings 6 verse 7, we read, "And the house, when it was in building, was built of stones made ready, before they were brought thither, so that there was neither hammer nor axe nor any tool of iron heard in the house, while it was in building." I will mention but 2 things in the tracing board, and the first of these is a pair of things, the rough and the perfect ashlars. Both of these ashlars are reminders of the necessity for moral behavior, and the importance of developing the intellectual faculty. In the ritual we are told, the rough ashlar is a stone, rough and unhewn as taken from the quarry until, by the industry and ingenuity of the workman, it is modelled, wrought into due form, and rendered fit for the hands of the more expert craftsman. This represents man in his infant or primitive state, rough and unpolished as that stone, until by the kind care and attention of his parents or guardians, by giving a liberal and virtuous education, his mind becomes cultivated, and he is thereby rendered a fit member of civilized society. The perfect ashlar is a stone of true die or square, fit to be tried only by the square and compasses. This represents man in the decline of years, after a regular well-spent life in acts of piety and virtue, which cannot otherwise be tried and approved than by the square of God's word, and the compasses of his own self-convincing conscience. Dr. Mackey, Encyclopedia of Freemasonry, and its kindred sciences, presents the same idea in these words.
The rough ashlar, or stone in its rude and unpolished conditions, is emblematical of man in his natural state. Ignorant, uncultivated, and vicious. But when education has exercised its wholesome influence in expanding his intellect, restraining his passions, and activating his mind, he is then represented by the perfect ashlar, which, under the skillful hand of the expert craftsman, has been smoothed and squared and fitted for its place in the building.
Joseph Fort Newton, the Builders, clothes the idea in these beautiful words.
Freemasonry insists that its members shall be men, free men of adult age and of good report. Then, as the stones of King Solomon's temple were hewn and chiseled and shaped and polished, far away, so that without the sound of axe or hammer, they might be softly, silently set in the place that awaited them, so in the lodges of Freemasonry the characters of its members are silently, secretly smoothed and shaped, until the rough stone becomes the perfect ashlar. The long pilgrimage is over, the working tools are laid down, and the finished stone finds its last resting place in the great temple of humanity, which the great architect has been building since the world began.
Now let me add the thought contained in the last verse of that poem by Lawrence Greenleaf, entitled Temple of Living Stones.
Although our past achievements we with honest pride review, as long as there's rough ashlars there is work for us to do. We still must shape the living stones with instruments of love, for that eternal mansion in the paradise above. Toil as we've toiled in ages past to carry out the plan. 'Tis this, the fatherhood of God, and the brotherhood of man.
In ordinary everyday life, when we speak of a rude or polished mind, of an upright man, who is a pillar of society, of meeting on the level, and acting on the square, we are using words that found their origin in our Masonic craft, and when we speak of putting someone through the 3rd degree, we are thinking of an ordeal, and our Masonic ordeal teaches us that we cannot rely on our own worth, no matter how virtuous, nor yet on all the science and accumulated knowledge of mankind, but only on the sure grip of faith. All else will prove a slip and fail us in the hour of trial. Which brings us back to the point where we started our journey, and where we answered that most important challenge, in all cases of difficulty and danger, in whom do you put your trust? Our answer, in God, is a confession of faith, the simple faith of Masonry, but the simple faith of Masonry is its very cornerstone, its first and greatest landmark, the basis of its plan, its purpose, its promise. There is no other foundation. Upon faith in God, Freemasonry builds its temple of brotherly love, relief, and truth. As he has for most things, Dr. Newton, the Builders, has something apt to say about the simple faith, and so I will conclude this talk with his words.
Out of this simple faith grows by inevitable logic, the philosophy which Freemasonry teaches in signs and symbols, in pictures and parables. Stated briefly, stated vividly, it is that behind the pageant of nature, in it, and over it, there is a supreme being, who initiates, impels and controls all, that behind the life of man and his pathetic story in history, there is a righteous will, the intelligent conscience of the Most High. In short, that the last thing in the universe is mind, that the highest and deepest thing is conscience, and that the final reality is the absoluteness of love. Higher than this faith cannot fly, and deeper than this, thought cannot dig.
I hope you enjoyed this presentation. If so, remember to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so you will be alerted when the next video is uploaded.